Welcome to Trip 3 of Rouge UnCruise, sponsored by Friends of the Rouge, promoters and advocates for the watershed of all watersheds. This year, our annual Rouge Cruise is virtual due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and therefore we deemed it an uncruise. While we miss seeing you in person and wish you could be out on the river with us tonight, doing so could potentially expose you to an illness that has taken over 6,600 Michiganders. Instead, hop on board Sally and Paul's kayak and visit the Rouge River from a new perspective, seeing places the Diamond Bell could not reach, and hearing from different voices about the projects and entities that shaped its history and make the river what it is today. Narrated by Friends of the Rouge board and staff, we trust that you will learn new things and enhance your sense of place with a historic and dynamic Rouge River. So, I am Sally Petrella, Monitoring Manager at Friends of the Rouge, where I also work on the water trail. Along with narrating tonight, I was the lucky one to paddle the route in my kayak with a GoPro camera with the assistance of my husband, Paul Stark.
Hi, I'm Orin Gelderloos, Professor of Biology and Professor of Environmental Studies at the University of Michigan-Dearborn. I recently retired from active teaching, but continue to do research on the floodplain ecology of the Rouge River as a research associate of the Environmental Interpretive Center. I am also pleased to be a member of the Board of Directors of the Friends of the Rouge. This is the third segment of a trip that we started on August 11 at Zug Island. We've been traveling at a steady pace along the Rouge now for the past 2 weeks, and will reach our final destination on September 8 at Fairlane Estate and the University of Michigan-Dearborn. On our trip, we've packed sufficient marshmallows, chocolate bars, and graham crackers to make and to eat s'mores as we sing campfire songs every evening, although we did have to compete with the Canada geese for snacks. Tonight then, we'll start at 4th Street Bridge Park. Take a look at the red arrow there and explore Fortson Island, the Fort Rouge complex, and more. Next week on September 1st, we'll explore the concrete channel and learn about the plans to remove part of it on that green section. And finally, we conclude the uncruise on September 8, that's the olive part, with a tour of the restored oxbow at the Henry Ford and the Fairlane Estate and the new fish passageway. Here's a close-up of the map showing tonight's trip and our route around Fortson Island under the Dix Bridge to the Rouge Turning Basin and the Ford Rouge Complex. So far, we have observed how humans have interacted with the Rouge River over the past many centuries. Since the arrival of Antoine Cadillac, we have used it for transportation and for people and for capital materials. We have seen fit to use it for disposal of human waste and many automobiles, as well as anything considered trash. As a result, the Rouge River and its surrounding properties have been considered out of sight and out of mind for a long time. The goals of Friends of the Rouge is to bring to light the relationship of humans to the river and the associated land of the entire watershed. On our third uncruise, we will continue to daylight the out-of-sight and out-of-mind features of the dirty river we appreciate and care for. In addition, I think it's very important to know how the products that we use and make and how they function. Tonight, we start upstream in the shadow of the newest and finest example of a bascule bridge. It was designed by the Michigan Department of Transportation with the intention of teaching people the bascule principle of balance and counterweights. We give the designers kudos for putting the counterweight on top of this bridge rather than putting it underneath the bridge.
We also leave the new 4th Street Bridge Park that commemorates the 1932 Ford Hunger March that you heard about on the last trip. We are passing by several properties owned by Marathon Petroleum that they are donating to the Michigan Department of Natural Resources to be used for the Phase 2 planned kayak launch and freighter viewing platform. So imagine that, an accessible launch that looks like this, I'll show you in a minute, to put in your kayak and to explore. Or you can just come view the river on this platform right here and view the occasional freighter that comes up and takes up almost the whole river, like this K.E. Barker bound for the Ford Rouge plant in 2011. You now start to see the tugboats owned by the Gaelic Tugboat Company with names like Shannon and Sheila Kay. Bill Huey started the Gaelic Tugboat Company in 1964 with the purchase of his first tug, the Tipperary. He purchased the Fuller Towing Company, and his business grew with the towing of salt and oil barges, moving the giant Great Lakes freighters into and out of small areas. By the 1970s, he had a fleet of 15 tugs and was proud to win the 1982 tugboat competition at the International Freedom Festival with his tug William A. Whitney. The tugs were all named after family members. The building coming up on your left was used to service streetcars. It has a huge lifting equipment on the ceiling. Later, it was a glue factory, and I've been told that there was a blob of glue as large as an automobile on the floor. It's now owned by two gentlemen who once offered use of the large rooms to Friends of the Rouge for events. We now start to see some of the Diamond Jack boats, starting with the Diamond Queen. In 1991, Bill Huey responded to the changing economy by purchasing a 65-foot former Arnold Line Mackinac Island ferry, outfitting it as a sightseeing vessel, and launched Diamond Jack's river tours. You might see the Diamond Bell right there. His tours were so popular that he purchased two more Arnold Line ferries, the Diamond Bell, which we rent yearly for our cruise, and the Diamond Queen. Bill Huey passed away in 2013, but his family now continues both operations. His daughter, Patricia, is now president. Don't forget to wave as you pass by. There's their offices right there.
Well, here on the right bank is an inconspicuous concrete wall with the Canada geese that follow us every day. This is actually the outlet of Baby Creek. In the time of the settlers, Baby Creek was probably a small, free-flowing stream and given the name Baby Creek. As population and industry of the area grew, people discharged their waste into the stream and it flowed into the Rouge River. As odors from the ditch grew, so did the need to control stormwater. The city decided to enclose the creek bed in large concrete conduits. There are now 3 conduits. Each one is 14 feet by 17 feet in dimension. About this time, which was in the 1930s, the city connected these large conduits to a large pipe called an interceptor to take the flow to the Detroit wastewater treatment plant. However, during large storm events, the combined sewage and stormwater would overwhelm the capacity of the interceptor, and the untreated CSO would discharge into the Rouge River. In the early 2000s, this innocuous facility on Dix Road was constructed. We now have a $73 million combined sewage treatment facility capable of screening and disinfecting up to 2.7 million gallons per minute of wastewater and stormwater. What is unique about the CSUO treatment facility is that, unlike the Oakwood facility that we mentioned last week, it does not have a settling basin. Now, why not? Engineers and the MDQ and the EGLE of Michigan found that a facility that removed debris out of the water by screening and provided disinfection using sodium hypochlorite or bleach would provide enough treatment to meet the water quality standards of waste arriving in the Rouge River. Thus, the long and large conduits are used to provide at least 10 minutes of contact time for the bleach to kill the bacteria. So now when it rains, water still comes out of the concrete wall that I showed earlier, but it is now partially treated and meets water quality standards. So the question is partial treatment enough? Well, that's a question for us to consider another time and another place with our water engineering experts. But as a result of using the already existing underground conduits, the people of the city did not have to pay for a large multi-million gallon retention basin, as we did with the Oakwood facility and the River Rouge facility. Now, lest we underestimate the complexity of the screen and disinfection facility, we should be aware that this basin has a fully automated operating system, and it controls 300 major pieces of equipment. And in addition, it has 4 36,000 gallon storage tanks for hypochlorite storage. Now, those are 4 large, huge beach bottles. In order to be informed citizens, I strongly believe that we all should be aware of the facilities like this in our community that are typically out of sight and out of mind. So now a few yards upstream from the Baby Creek outlet, we're going to be able to see 5 round fuel storage tanks of the Water Petroleum Terminal. What you can do is see that there's a large barge docked on its edge. Obviously, the Rouge River is essential to transport large quantities of petroleum. Again, this out of sight and out of mind company does $10 to $20 million worth of business per year in the Southeast Michigan economy.
Straight ahead, you can see barges and dredging equipment owned by Dean Marine and Excavating Incorporated, located on the southeastern edge of Fortson Island. Based in Mount Clemens, Dean Marine works primarily in the dredging trade around Lake St. Clair and the Detroit River, but also takes on jobs all across the U.S. Great Lakes. The company has yards in both Mount Clemens and Dearborn. So we are now turning into the channel around Fortson Island, so you can see the red arrow there. We're taking that turn. In 1917, a large straight channel was dug to accommodate ore carriers. Fortson Island was created when it was found that the original path of the Rouge River was too shallow and meandered way too much to allow Ford Motor Company to get their manufactured submarine chaser Eagle boats meant for use in World War II to the Detroit River. I'm sorry, World War I, to the Detroit River. Thus, the origin of Fortson Island began as a peninsula and became an island, as did Zug Island, and an isolated part of the city of Dearborn. So you can see how this major channel really separated that piece of Dearborn, and it's now far closer to the city of Detroit. And I wanted to show you this cool blueprint that showed the plans for the creation of Fortson Island. So you can see how this piece of land was once part of Dearborn, and it contained the Abbott and Bamers Riverview 1914 subdivision. The subdivision was vacated in 1920 due to the Corps of Engineers project. You can see this line here across that shows you where the shortcut channel was dug. You also might note up here that Baby Creek that Orin just talked about, that used to be a river that's now underground in a pipe. So back to our map here, note how Riverside Drive here, would, if it could go across the river, would connect to Riverside Drive over there in Dearborn. For many years, Marathon Petroleum had a transfer terminal on the island right about here, but because they have another terminal downstream at Fort Street that you heard about on the last trip, they closed Fordson Island. Discussions are underway about the future of this island. Marathon Petroleum would like to donate their land for a wildlife habitat. The Gateway plan suggests that the island will make an excellent transfer location for passengers from Great Lakes cruise ships to board tour boats to travel up and down the Rouge River to the Fairlane Estate, the University of Michigan-Dearborn, and to Greenfield Village. Several families lived on Fordson Island from the 1930s to the 1970s, including Friends of the Rouge member Daisy Lovain, who actually is listening in tonight. She and her brother Joe came on the 2012 Rouge Cruise, and some of you might remember her taking the microphone right here to tell cruisers about life on the island. Daisy has been volunteering for many years with Friends of the Rouge. You may recognize her from our bug hunts and our stonefly searches, where she single-handedly runs registration. She has a keen interest in history and also volunteers at the Dearborn Historical Museum. When I asked if she was willing to be interviewed for the UnCruise, she dug deep into her memories about growing up on the island and shared her story and her photos.
My name is Daisy Lovain, and I grew up on Fortson Island in the 40s and 50s. My father came to the United States from Croatia. Sometime in the late 20s or 30s, he built himself a house.
And that's just showing where her house was.
I was the youngest of 3 children. Both my brother Joe and I were born in the house on the island. In my opinion, and I think my family's too, that we felt we were in a paradise in the midst of a city because, for one thing, it was cooler there. In the summertime, we were surrounded by water. Almost everybody who lived on the island was interested in boats. Obviously, living on the end of the island, we saw all the Ford boats that came by, all the freighters. The picture on the right is from the Friends of the Rouge. I'm not sure where they got it from, but boy, that picture depicts the water I knew as a child. And I believe that picture was taken in 1965. I was about 9 years old in this picture, and my brother was about 12. And we never went in the water on purpose, except for one really hot day. My mother was gone, and so my brother was a bit of a devil, and he coerced me into going into the water. We called it the Big River. The Big River was the channel, and the Little River was the original water. But anyway, we went into the water, and my mother came home, and she was so angry. And we were confused, and I don't think she told us why we shouldn't have been in that water. She just told us to get out. There were no fish in that water. There was no seed, no life in that water at all. Once in a while, you'd see an oil slick turtle or a bird that might have got caught in the grease. The golden color, I have no idea where that comes from. But you can see the oil slicks on the Little River, and that was the common occurrence, to see those oil slicks. So I left in about the 60s, but we always came back. Everybody loved Grandma's house. We were there constantly. But things were changing, and this picture shows the marathon tanks in the background. After my father died in 1961, I don't know when, but the lime plant was built. And by the 70s, the dust from the lime plant made living unbearable there. It was just like a half inch of lime dust over everything. Many years later, when I went out with the Friends of the Rouge on the Rouge Cruise, I almost cried when I saw the ducks and the green plants. And that is why I have such a soft spot for an organization that can clean up. It's amazing. Thank you, Friends of the Rouge.
Thank you, Daisy. We now continue into the old channel, going by what was once the Dearborn Yacht Club you can see on the left. Once a place for people to keep their boats, it's no longer active, as renters just abandon their boats like you can see here. To clean up this eyesore, Friends of the Rouge is working with the Detroit-Wayne County Port Authority to apply for funds to remove these boats like we did in 2011 through a marine debris removal grant. The bridge over to Fortson Island is low, but was passable by kayaks up until the recent rise in Great Lakes water levels. As we stated on earlier UnCruise trips, down here close to the Detroit River, the river is much more affected by Great Lakes water levels than rainfall. This is going to be a tight squeeze. I don't know. Hang on tight while we turn our kayak into a submarine and go under the bridge and come out the other side. Phew, we made it. It's hard to believe this backwater area once carried all of the flow of the Rouge River. Being out of the main channel, it has become a refuge for wildlife, and you might see this little thing over here. Oh, it's an old tire that two painted turtles are using to bask in the sun, nicely illustrating wildlife in the midst of industry. In 2007, when Friends of the Rouge organized a small group with Riverside Kayak Connection to explore kayaking on this part of the river, this area looked very different. We were shocked to find a boat graveyard far larger than the 6 abandoned vessels you just saw on the other side of the bridge. Pleasure craft, an old wooden boat, a metal fishing boat, 2 houseboats, abandoned docks, and more lined the banks of Fortson Island on the Detroit side. Well, some people were charmed by these boats. I think they call that ruin porn. To Friends of the Rouge, they were symbolic of an uncared for river, and we had to do something about it. 4 years later, in 2011, we were able to put the partners together and to get these boats out with funding from a National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Marine Debris Removal Grant and the partnership of the Detroit-Wayne County Port Authority. Friends of the Rouge's role in the grant was community involvement and before and after documentation. You can see Karen here taking some pictures. So we set to work taking photos of every single boat, discovering that there were actually about 19. We also conducted surveys for benthic macroinvertebrates or bugs, as well as fish that we will tell you more about later. Some of the boats came out in one piece, like this wooden boat. Others, like this metal boat, were cut into pieces and recycled. 3 of the boats had fuels that had to be pumped out. Marine Pollution Control, who you heard about on UnCruise Trip 1, took care of that. Waste Management provided the dumpsters. After the work with heavy equipment was done, we invited volunteers to come out to the island and do more cleanup. They managed to find and remove a 20th boat. Daisy participated, and she also led volunteers to find the ruins of her home, which was really neat. So we are now going to take a short pause to answer some of your questions. But before we do that, I wanted to give a special thank you to the 2020 Rouge UnCruise event series sponsors, AK Steel, Smith Group, Ann Ivory Studios, Burns McDonnell, Carmoose, Cardno, ECT, Giffords Webster, Honeywell, Mannix Smith Group, Marathon Petroleum Company, Midwestern Consulting, MJ Electric, OHM, and to all of the Rouge UnCruise supporters. So I'm going to turn this over to Marie, who will field some questions. And
good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, Sally and Orin. That was wonderful. And Daisy's interview was so great. I love that. Thank you for sharing your story, Daisy. So the first question was from Bill, and he asked a question regarding the low bridge that crosses over to Fortson Island from the main part, I guess it'd be of Marathon Gardens. So as we passed the Dearborn Yacht Club, he wanted to know what the top side of the low bridge was used for.
The top side of the low bridge. I mean, it's a bridge where you can drive to the island. So I guess that's what he's referring to. I mean, we were just seeing the side of it. I could have put a picture from it from the top, but there's a bridge there, and mainly right now it's just used by Dean Marine to drive their vehicles over to work at the site. There's a private property owner out there, but they're not there very often, and the marine hauling company controls the bridge. So it's a driving bridge, but not real safe for large vehicles.
And I'll just add to that it's not available for public use either. So in order to go to Fortson Island, you do need permission to go over there. So I have another question here from Michael. He asked a question about the passenger dock on Fortson Island and who or how many own the island today. So I think the passenger dock question was really referring to maybe the long-term vision for Fortson Island. And then I think you just answered the question about who owns the island. But maybe you could elaborate a little bit more on the vision for Fortson Island and how that plays into the Rouge Gateway Trail.
So Fortson Island is a good portion of it is owned by the city of Dearborn. There's a couple private property owners, and actually the state land bank owns a lot of it. So there's been a lot, and then there's the big piece of it on the big water side, as Daisy calls it, that is still owned by Marathon. So at this point in time, there's a vision, but there's no real agreement on what's going to be done with the island. The Rouge River is an area of concern, and there's a project that should get some funding by the EPA to try to create wildlife and wildlife habitat. And so a long-term vision of maybe being able to take a kayak over to that island, but there's nothing definite. There's no boat docks over there. Those boat slips that we were showing you are on the Detroit side, not on the island side.
So I think this is a really good question, maybe our last question before we resume our program. But Joe Lee asked, is anyone allowed to kayak the same path that you kayaked, Sally? Or is a permit needed for that also? And I think it might be also a good time to just kind of talk about kayaking that section of the river and where to safely enter and exit.
So it's wide open for you to kayak. As I was mentioning earlier, this is part of the Rouge River Water Trail that we're developing, which goes from Canton all the way to the Detroit River. And we have some issues further upstream with wood in the river that we're working on addressing, but this part of the river is, there are no log jams. It's completely accessible. The closest launch to this spot would be Melvindale, which you'll see on our next trip. And we're actually working on getting some funding to put an accessible launch like we showed you at the Fort Street Bridge. So when those two go in, it'll be very, very accessible. You do have some concerns when you're paddling this stretch of the river, just because there's freighters that could be coming down, making their way to the Ford Rouge plant. So we have a great website you can find, and it has all kinds of information, including a link to something called Boat Nerd, where you can see in real time when freighters are coming and make sure to stay out of their way.
Thanks, Sally.
And we are going to get going here. So as we continue around the channel, we want to point out that Detroit is to your left and Dearborn is to your right. That's Fortson Island. It's still part of Dearborn. On the left is what remains of Detroit's Oakwood Heights neighborhood. So up until 2012, you could see about 200 homes of Oakwood Heights here, and this is one of them. Despite the poor air quality caused by multiple entities, people who lived here liked their oasis. One artist family was even planning an artist enclave. From 2003 to 2011, Friends of the Rouge organized an annual Rouge Rescue Site with Southwest Detroit Environmental Vision. Maybe some of you attended at the end of Powell here. You can actually see a mural that was painted as part of Rouge Rescue to the far right. I'll show you. So recently, Paul Drouse and the Frog Group have taken up organizing the Rouge Rescue cleanup site here. So there's that mural that the community planted. In 2011, the neighborhood completely changed when Marathon offered to purchase all the homes to create a buffer from their refinery that had recently expanded to process oil tar sands. So what you're looking at right here is actually what used to be a neighborhood. The homes have been removed, grass has been planted, and it's remarkable today, the change from human habitat to goose habitat. So we're now going to hear from Treva Formby. She is from Marathon, and she's going to tell us more about what they're planning for the area.
My name is Treva Formby, and I work for Marathon Petroleum, the Detroit Refinery, and I'm an environmental professional, and I work on the air emissions inventory. I do community right-to-know reporting, and I also do, I have responsibility for the Marathon Gardens project. In 2012, the refinery underwent an an expansion, which made it grow towards the Oakwood Heights neighborhood, a neighborhood very close to the refinery, and the refinery was just getting closer. So Marathon decided to offer a voluntary buyout to all the residents of Oakwood Heights. And about 80% of the residents took the voluntary offer. Anyone who wanted to stay was welcome to stay. And Marathon tore down the houses, filled in with topsoil and grass, and began to maintain the neighborhood. So it turned into a like a very grassy space with a lot of residential trees. And since we had so much acreage, it was almost 100 acres, the environmental department was tasked with creating a vision for what we would do with the space. So we decided that we would like a green space by the refinery, and that we would like to incorporate elements of wildlife habitat, urban farming, and park-like spaces. So the first thing we did actually was get involved with the Frog Partnership to develop the 4th Street Bridge Park. We were one of the early donors. We have almost 3 acres of habitat now with 350 trees, probably 150 shrubs, and actually a wildflower meadow. We've also installed 3 bat boxes, a snake hibernacula, a turtle nesting area, and several piles of logs that were designed by our landscape architect to provide habitat for mammals, foxes, and rabbits, and things like that. Last year we have a fox, a mother fox that lives out there, and last year she had 4 kits. We did spot a sign of a beaver. We had counted 32 turtles lined up on that log, and they were all just as close, stacked up one on top of the other all the way across. And I thought that was the funniest thing I'd ever seen, was all those turtles wedged into such a small space on that log. I don't know what I expected when I started out. I thought maybe as we, develop the wildlife habitat, there would be more and more wildlife, but I didn't realize how much of it was actually there before we started. We own 4 small residential plots that are immediately adjacent to the 4th Street Bridge Park, and we're working with MDNR right now on donating them to MDNR so that the park can be expanded. I think the Frog Group's intention is to put a kayak launch on that area. So it'll be a way for people not only to sit and look at the river, but actually get into the river. So that'll be really exciting.
So thank you, Treva. And I did learn from my coworkers that Treva is on tonight. So if you have any questions for her later, feel free to put them out there. We now continue around Fortson Island, where you can find an amazing variety of wildlife, including green herons, beaver, turtles, great blue herons, cormorants, swallows, and more. What you might not know about are the creatures that live under the water, out of sight and out of mind. As part of the project to remove abandoned boats that you heard about earlier, Friends of the Rouge monitored the channel here for bugs and fish. We did before and after surveys and compared what we found to see if there were any improvements. At that time, Friends of the Rouge had no experience with fish surveys, so we asked the DNR to bring their equipment and their biologists, and we assisted them. They brought their electroshocking boat, which you can see out there in the distance. So the poles on the bow of the boat deliver a shock to the water, temporarily stunning the fish, and those on board quickly scoop them up, and I had to stick in that picture to show that I was there too. So here's a diagram showing how the hull of the boat acts as the cathode, or the negative charge, where electricity flows out, and the pole at the front of the boat acts as the anode, or the positive charge, where the electricity moves into. You might wonder how those workers on the boat keep from getting shocked. That's why you see us wearing insulated gloves and boots. They also have an emergency off switch on the boat. We were amazed by the 78 carp and giant goldfish we caught, but also happy to find 13 species. Right here, you're looking at a gizzard shad that Bob Muller photographed. Gizzard shad are named for the gizzard, or the sack that's filled with rocks or sand that they use to grind food. In the spring or late winter, we often have large die-offs of these fish because they're very sensitive to temperature change. And check out that specially designed aquarium that Bob Muller created so that he could take excellent photographs of fish. We sampled in 2010 before the boats were removed, and then we sampled again afterwards in 2012. We were happy to see, and let me move this, we were happy to see the number of species go from 13 to 16 and to find target species like this beautiful northern pike. So we also caught a bowfin. So this is an ancient fish once found in 7 continents, but now only found in North America. Check out this long dorsal fin that actually extends from the head all the way to the base of the tail, longer than any other Michigan fish. Bowfin like slow areas with aquatic plants and can gulp air as well as use gills. The males are good parents, guarding both the eggs and the small fish that you would call fry. So here's the results showing you all the species that we found in 2010 before the boats were removed, and then following it in 2012. First of all, we found almost twice as many species, 318 in 2012. We also found 3 more species, 16 species. We were very pleased to find an additional sensitive species, the smallmouth bass, and also one of our target species, the northern pike. Bob Muller, who started Friends of the Rouge Fish Survey Program when he interned with us in 2012, has now published a book about fish in the Rouge River, and there he is there showing off some of the fish. With him and his partner, Phil Kukowski, we have now sampled every tributary and branch of the Rouge River and almost every lake, and personally met over 60,000 fish. In addition to the good news about the fish, we are pleased that the channel has a dense population of the aquatic plant Vallisneria americana, or wild celery, used for food by canvasback ducks. Aquatic plants provide food and cover for benthic macroinvertebrates and fish, but they're very rare in the Rouge River watershed. Friends of the Rouge recently discovered an endangered minnow living in Upper Long Lake in Oakland County. Upper Long Lake has areas with healthy aquatic vegetation, unlike most lakes in the county, that are devoid of any vegetation, so that beaches can just be clear sand. Okay, Orin, I turn it over to you.
Thank you. Well, as soon as we get back in our kayaks here, we're going to be heading out into the Detroit River and the Big River, as Daisy would call it. And we are going to be heading upstream. So we want to wait just for a moment here until we get our boats launched and get headed in that direction. Because we're going to watch in the water right in front of us, and you're going to see a carp come out of that water. And this is an unusual thing to see. And I'll look at, hang on here, look sharp. Look at that. There's a carp spy hopping right in the water. I think it's got a gene of a whale in it somewhere. The view that you're seeing right now is what Daisy once enjoyed from her house, as seen from this 1963 photograph. That big tower there that was part of Ford Motor Company is taken down in the 1990s. The bridge that we're coming up against here is the last bascule bridge that we'll see on the Detroit River. Its counterweight is under the bridge, and of course you can't see it. This bridge is owned by Wayne County. And here's the bridge tender's tower. This presented a very interesting dilemma for Wayne County, as Wayne County championed the cleanup of the Rouge River. This was built in 1926 for a bridge tender who had to be present 24/7. Thus, it had a toilet, but the toilet dumped directly into the Rouge River. This is not uncommon. People north of Ford Road also had their outhouse positioned above the Rouge River, and this was before sanitary sewers were connected to their house. But now what should Wayne County do and not be hypocritical about polluting the river that it's in charge of cleaning? So guess what? They installed a burn toilet called an incinerator, not a toilet. No, it doesn't light on fire when you flush. That would be painful. The incinerator uses paper line for each royal occasion. When you press the disposal pedal, the products drop into a container which has an electric heating bar on the bottom. It's something like you'd see in an electric oven. The temperature of the bar then cycles off between 1,000 degrees and 960 degrees. Everything ends up then as a few ashes, which you can put in the trash. Thankfully, all of this occurs out of sight and out of mind. In case you're interested, the incinerator has an exhaust system to the outside, just as a bathroom fan has. Well, as Sally and Paul headed under the Dix Bridge in June, they got very wet despite the clear blue sky. According to Lloyd Baldwin, who was with our guest last week from Michigan Department of Transportation, summertime can be troublesome for these bridges as the expansion of the metal caused them to lock up. He has seen hoses being madly pointed at the bridge as a freighter bears down on it. As I drove over the bridge in the past weeks this summer, I saw this hose pointed in the middle of the bridge to keep it cool and keep it functional. Now we're stopping here to recognize our UnCruise champions.
So a warm thank you to all of them.
Thank you so much, Sally and Dr. Gelderloos. This has been so interesting. I love the incinerator toilet you talked about, Dr. Gelderloos. That's fascinating, and that's actually the first time I've heard about it. So because we just talked about the fish, I would love to just kind of talk about a couple of fish questions that were asked. One is, are any of the species that you found, are they invasive? Any of the fish in the pool, particularly?
So I'll take that one. So we didn't find them at Fortson Island, but we are finding a very invasive fish called the round goby. And it is a real problem throughout the Great Lakes. It's from Russia, and it just outcompetes a lot of native fish. So that's a huge problem. Those carp that you saw, those are just your common carp, and then the goldfish. Both of those are not native, and they're not like the really bad Asian carp you hear about, but they're not a good thing in the system. And like that spy hopping carp that you saw, they do stir up a lot of sediments. In fact, somebody sent me a picture today about one up in Beverly Hills, asked me what it was, and they're not a good thing. So we have about 5 different non-native species, and probably the worst one is the round goby. And then just to add to that, we also, first year when we started surveying, we found something called a mumachug, which is also an invasive species. And this was a success story because we notified the DNR and they went and they wiped out the entire population. So we no longer have them.
Great, thank you, Sally. That's great. I have another question from an anonymous attendee that kind of asked a question about the contaminated sediment around Fortson Island, and it probably goes for all the contaminated sediment on the Lower Rouge, how it impacts the health of the fish and the animals that live in the area.
Well, I'll answer it, and my response is we don't know. It would really take a veterinary pathologist to examine the organisms, the fish and mammals and even birds, and take a look at their livers and to see what is stored in the livers and what chemicals are there.
And, just as Daisy was saying, when she was there in the 50s and 60s, there were no fish there. And when we first started doing benthic surveys, we tried to use a device where we grabbed sediments from the bottom, and we pulled up just some icky black stuff that smelled terribly like petroleum. And we only found some worms and midge larvae.
Great. Thanks for that answer. Appreciate it. And there's another fish question. Regarding the fish survey that you conducted, from Dale, he asked, what do you make of the huge jump in goldfish found in the survey? I did actually notice that myself, and I'm curious.
I'm just not really sure about that. It might just have been the time of year that we caught a lot of them. I think one of the things I didn't point out is that even though we found a lot more fish the second time, we did have like 87 blunt-nosed minnows. And I think part of that was that Bob Muller came on our second time, and he really likes to count all those, or he has the patience to count all those small fish.
That's great. We'll do one more question from Daryl, which is also related to fish. Thanks for all the great fish questions. But I think this relates to the Michigan Eat Safe Fish program. But the question is, are fish caught in the Rouge safe to eat?
From my understanding, and there's very specific guidelines that were developed by Community Health for the Rouge River, and for the most part, with the larger fish and fish like catfish that spend a lot of time in the sediments, or that eat pretty high on the food chain, so they're concentrating contaminants. Those can be a real problem. But when you're looking farther up on the Rouge, even things like creek chubs that aren't eating other fish, some of those may be safe because they don't concentrate the contaminants.
And we'll go ahead and put a link in the chat to the Eat Safe Fish
Would be great.
campaign, so that if you want to check that out, it's really handy. It goes by, I believe, parts of the river that you're interested in. And it will give you really specific numbers of fish that are safe to eat in a period of time. So go ahead and check that out. Well, I'm going to turn it back over to Sally and Dr. Gelderloos.
Okay. We'll get back in the kayaks again. And
There he
now
is in the kayak.
We'll be entering the turning basin of the world's famous Rouge Ford plant. The turning basin was designed to allow Great Lake freighters to easily dock and unload the taconite containing iron, limestone, and coke. They can back out and turn around with the assistance of tugboats and be guided downstream to the Detroit River. During the late 1920s and early 30s, the Ford Rouge plant became an icon. It was the largest industrial complex in the world, as well as the most advanced architecturally and technically. Because Henry Ford was determined to be independent of suppliers, he developed the Rouge into an almost self-sufficient, self-contained industrial city. Henry Ford had purchased the site in 1915 as a new home for his revolutionary automated assembly line, which was perfected at his Highland Park facility. Mr. Ford got the idea of an assembly line by watching people process animals at a meatpacking plant. Construction began on April 1st, 1917, and 10 years later, the facility contained, well, listen to this now, 93 structures, 90 miles of railroad tracks, 27 miles of conveyors, 53,000 machine tools, and 75,000 employees. If you, by the way, were involved in any aspect of constructing this facility, please share your experiences on the chat option on your computer right now. So the Ford Rouge plant was no ordinary factory complex. World-renowned Detroit architect Albert Kahn designed most of the complex. Today, the Rouge is only one of many Ford Motor Company manufacturing and assembly facilities, but is still unique in American industry and architecture. It contained 2,300 acres in Dearborn, and it was built to receive iron ore from Upper Michigan, coal from Pennsylvania, limestone from the Tilton mine in the Upper Peninsula by ship. Even while he operated the Rouge plant, Mr. Ford continued to make the Model T at Highland Park. On May 26, 1927, the last Model T came off the line at Highland Park. In September 1927, the new Model A began rolling out of the Rouge plant. Over the next 15 years, 15 million cars paraded out of the Rouge. About 20 years ago, Ford Motor Company sold half of its property to of the coke and the steel manufacturing operations to a Russian firm called Severstal North America. Subsequently, it was purchased by AK Steel, who is the current owner. So when it comes to iron and steel making, just a reminder, the iron making process begins with a taconite which contains iron ore. It is combined with coke made from coal and limestone in a blast furnace. AK Steel no longer makes coke at the Rouge plant because it's dusty, dirty process. Rather, they transport it in from West Virginia. In order to make steel from molten iron, it needs to be refined according to the specifications of the customer. AK Steel makes hundreds of varieties of steel, so steel is just not steel. So off the molten iron goes then from the foundry to something called the Basic Oxygen Furnace, or BOF. That's a huge building that you can see right in front of us at this time. This photo of a basic oxygen furnace in operation with molten iron on its way to becoming steel. The schematic that you see here is a typical basic oxygen furnace. I always wondered how they worked. The opening at the top receives the molten iron, which has 4% carbon in it, and that needs to be removed. Also, we put in 25% scrap iron. And here's the scrap iron that arrives at the Rouge plant, all in these cubes. Sally and I scrambled over the top of this, and I found my 1950 four-door Plymouth in there, and Sally found her former Honda all boxed up in a cube. Besides the scrap iron, they put a good dose of limestone into that molten iron. They put oxygen in through that pipe that's going down the center of it, and it's called a lance made out of copper. It's water cooled, and after about 20 minutes, the carbon content is reduced, and the limestone has collected the impurities known as slag, which float on the top. The oxygen that comes through the pipe goes at supersonic speed, and it's piped all the way to AK Steel from Praxair, which is located on the Detroit River. As you can see from this schematic on the right, the furnace can be tilted to pour off the slag, first of all, because it floats. Next, the furnace is still tilted in the opposite direction, and the molten steel is tapped or poured into steel ladles at 2,900 degrees Fahrenheit to go into the casting process. But then we can say, okay, so what do you do with the slag? Well, it goes into a slag pot and it gets dumped onto a slag pile. From the slag pile, which you see here, it can go to Ed Levy Company in Dearborn for road construction. One of the slags that Levy will be making in the near future will reduce greenhouse gases. Actually, from my personal experience, the process is not so benign as I make it sound. Coming up, here's a photo of a very large fireball that happened while I was standing on the Dix Avenue Bridge, a quarter of a mile at least away. According to one of the members of Friends of the Rouge, who witnessed this event close up, this is a multi-sensory experience and really is something to see and hear the whoosh and feel the heat and smell the sulfurous odor mixed with an odor like striking a match. We're not certain if this is slag dumping or if it's molten iron being discarded. Apparently, it does not happen on a regular basis. For me and most of us, this is a huge fireball and a subsequent cloud of steam on the Rouge, which is out of sight and out of mind from our daily experience. Yet, it's all part of the materials and energy that go into my Ford vehicle. AK Steel sells steel to all automobile companies. Leaving the Rouge plant and AK Steel, we paddle upstream with much vegetation on the banks and the animals in the water.
So we're now heading past the plant near some outfalls. And as Orin mentioned, wildlife is often very abundant here. We got this close-up look at a red-eared slider. Wonder why I call it that? Why they call it that? Turtles tend to be pretty shy. This one, not so much until we got really quite close. So there he goes. So check out this double-crested cormorant as he takes off from the water, or is he walking on the water? Let's try that again. And notice the legs and their relation to the body. So yes, the legs of a cormorant on the bottom of the body, but more importantly, they're located near the back of the body, unlike say this mallard, which gets into the air from the water by popping straight up out of the water and does not run. At the same time, what's the difference between the feeding habits of a cormorant and a mallard? Cormorants are divers and they catch fish, as you can see this one going underwater, while mallards are dabblers. Mallards put their head down and their tails up, but do not immerse themselves completely into the water. The location of their legs adapts each one to its feeding habits. Also look at this photograph of a cormorant in flight above the water. Notice how close it flies to the surface. What's the advantage of flying so close to the water? When the cormorant pushes its wings down, the air pressure under the wings increases and gives it lift to the wings. When it pushes its wings down over water, the air pressure on the bottom of the wing is greater if the air molecules are compressed between the wing and the water, all of which adds to the greater efficiency of the cormorant's flight.
Thank you, Sally, for that great description. As we continue upstream, we may see some tanks on the left. There's a little white spot there. That belonged to Sun Oil Company, better known as Sunoco. The river was important in former times when many materials and products were received and shipped from here. Today, the primary services and products of Sunoco are energy transfer, storing crude oil, natural gas liquids, and refined products. As we continue, if you notice on the left, there's a mound and there's a pipe out there in the distance. This is the broken asphalt pavement at Cadillac Asphalt Company, and that mound is waiting to be recycled. You can see the building AK Steel in the background across the Rouge River. We're all familiar with asphalt, especially when it comes to leaving potholes. The manufacturing of asphalt also belongs in the categories of out of sight and out of mind, yet they in our watershed are integrally involved. Although making asphalt is simple, of course, you just mix gravel with some bitumen or tar and you have asphalt. Well, my tour of the operation revealed a more complicated business. First of all, which aggregate is best for you to make asphalt? First of all, they have about 24 grades of aggregate in the basic ingredient. The sizes range from fine sand to 1-inch limestone pieces. They have a rock crusher that makes the various sizes. Making certain that suppliers are available to deliver the quantity and quality when needed is an ongoing challenge. The customers are many contractors who are paving heavy-duty roads behind the orange barrels we have come to know and love, as well as residential roads, parking lots, playgrounds, and driveways. Each type of asphalt requires a different recipe. In my mind, making asphalt according to a recipe is comparable to a baker making a variety of cakes. You need a different cup of flour for this, baking powder, baking soda, the different flavors. The driver here, this front-end loader, needs to deliver the correct quantity of aggregates to one of the several bins on the conveyor belt. The operator in the control room needs to select the correct bin to empty the aggregate into a mixer. At the same time, the operator in the control room must select the appropriate quality of tar or bitumen from the vertical silo tanks on the right to mix with the aggregate. The ratio of aggregate to tar is approximately 100:5. All of this is done from a control room looking down on the truck that you can see vaguely in the chute below. Here's the truck getting its asphalt in right now. And this is a booming business that does not seem to be hindered by COVID-19. The trucks keep entering the lot at a steady rate, and a medium-sized vehicle like this seems to leave in about 10 or 15 minutes. All of the product is used in Southeast Michigan area, None of it goes very far away. Water runoff from the impervious surfaces is a major challenge to the restoration of our Rouge River. The more water we can keep on land, the better. Cadillac asphalt makes porous asphalt. Take a look at this schematic. The first thing you see, and when you lay it down in the subsoil, is geotextile. Then you put down a layer of open grade base reservoir. Then a stone recharge bed of crushed gravel with 40% open space between the stones is next. On top of that is a thin layer of clean, single-sided crushed stone, smaller than the stone in the recharge bed, and for some reason this is called choker course. And then finally, you apply the porous asphalt with 16% open space between the aggregate compared to 3 to 4% open space in ordinary asphalt. So you're putting in a new driveway or a tennis court, think about porous asphalt. Well, as we mentioned, we're taking a look at the organizations up on the land of the river that have used the river in the past. Here now, we are approaching the overhead conveyor belt that goes across the river from AK Steel over to Ed Levy's aggregate company. And we're nearing the terminus of our UnCruise 3 for today. This conveyor belt is significant in the work of Friends of the Rouge to educate about our river. A couple of decades ago, 3 community leaders, including a well-known Senate legislator from the state of Michigan, took a Boston whaler down this river. As they motored slowly down the stream and began to eat their gourmet box lunches, the outboard motor quit. By coincidence, they were passing beneath this conveyor belt, which sprinkled gravel and dirt on them and their gourmet lunch. I'm sorry I wasn't able to be with them for a number of reasons for the memorable occasion. Nonetheless, the legislator was extremely impressed by the voyage and was convinced that the River Rouge story, like we've been hearing, needed to be told. And so it happened that we got a boost in the promotion of our mission to educate and restore our river. Sally, back to you and Paul in the kayak.
We're delighted that you joined us on this UnCruise and appreciate your interest and support of our Friends of the Rouge organization. I want to give a special thank you to Dr. Orin Gelderloos, who gave us time and expertise to develop the script and provide visuals for this trip, visiting a lot of sites on his own time, as well as to his son and Alan and his wife, Shar, for assistance. He needs all the help he can get. He told me I had to say that. I want to thank Daisy Lovain for taking the time to share her memories and family photos. I want to thank Treva Formby for taking the time to be interviewed and providing photos. Like everyone during this pandemic, we are learning new skills, and I hope that you understand that this was not done by professionals, but by a small group of people who love this dirty river. We've shown you a working river that supports our industry, takes away our waste, provides transportation, mostly out of sight and out of mind. Your work over the past 50 years has vastly improved this river such that we are now able to paddle her. Let's pledge to work together over the next 50 years to finish cleaning her up and in the process, address the environmental inequalities that people who live down here experience on a daily basis. We're just about to conclude the formal presentation of this trip. We reserved the next half hour or how I think we went over a little bit, but to answer your burning questions and hear your comments and feedback. I, along with Dr. Gelderloos, Friends of the Rouge staff, and even Daisy and Treva will be available. Because this is a webinar, I think you've already figured out you need to use the question bar. So we hope to see you next week on September 1st at 6 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time. On that trip, we'll continue up the Rouge, under Schaefer, and along the Concrete Channel. It'll be narrated by Orin and me again, and include interviews by Jen Wenzel from Dearborn Fire, Paul Powell from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and David McCord from the Great Lakes Water Authority. So, out of sight, out of mind. Well, now they're in sight. This UnCruise was brought to you not just by the 2 faces that you see on the screen tonight, but by a whole team of Friends of the Rouge staff. Whether working directly on this presentation or doing the work to clean up this river for you to see, they are critical. We have Cindy Ross here in white. There's me. This volunteer, Sandy, who got in the picture, works in our office. Matthew Bertrand, Marie McCormick, our executive director, is here tonight. Erin Cassidy, Rouge Education Project Manager. Lara Edwards, one of our newer employees, who is our development coordinator. Jackie, who works on restoration programs, just got promoted to full-time. And Karen Hanna, who keeps us all together. So at this time, this concludes our formal presentation, and you're welcome to stay around for questions and answers.
Thanks, Sally. Thanks, Orin. Another wonderful presentation. You're already getting so many kudos. Really great effort. Thank you so much. So the first question that I'll kind of go back a little bit to Baby Creek. Is there a connection between Baby Creek CSO and the large oil spill that occurred in the Rouge in the early 2000s?
I don't think so. I'm not sure they actually found where all that came from. There were hearings held on it and the like, but I cannot picture it in my mind right now where it came from. And if I guess, I don't want to speculate because I might be wrong.
I think it went into a storm drain, and it could have possibly gone into the O'Brien drain by I-75. So certainly not Baby Creek. That's a little bit farther upstream. And that oil spill had a much larger effect on the Detroit River than it did on the Rouge because it was so far downstream.
Thanks, Sally. Thanks, Orin. I have a question from Paul. He's sort of actually directing it to Daisy. He's wondering if there's any recourse for homeowners who were affected by new industry, like the lime plant that you shared with us in your story.
Well, yeah, I would like to answer that. You know, it takes special people. My mother was by herself. She had she thought about seeing an attorney, but she just never did. And you know, when you organize like the Friends of the Rouge did, you carry more clout, and that's why you should get together. One person in my experience, you know, really can't do much.
Yeah, and I know that Daisy had shared that her mother, in fact, she shared that photo with me. Her mother had taken that photo because she had wanted to file a lawsuit, but she just wasn't able to do that. So thank you, Daisy.
Welcome.
Marie, could I ask Daisy a question?
Please.
Daisy, did you have electricity and telephone in the house that you lived there in the on the Fordson Island?
Well, we had electricity, but telephone service didn't come until I put it in. I was about 15 years old, and I was, you know, like any other 15-year-old, interested in the opposite sex. And so I wanted to be able to get a date. And I knew I couldn't get a date if I didn't have a telephone. So I got a job at Sam's department store where I went after work and worked the switchboard there until I earned enough money to buy telephone service. It took me a while, but I was telling Sally that was one of the greater, that was a life's pivotal moment that I learned that if you want something bad enough, you can work for it and you can achieve it.
Did you get a date?
Oh, yeah.
Great success.
Yeah.
Well worth it. Thank you so much, Daisy.
You're welcome.
Appreciate that. So we do have a question that maybe Treva could answer. So the first one is there community involvement in the formation of the green space or reclaimed area, or is it most of the work done by Marathon? And then also, what's the completion timeline for that park?
Yes, there's community involvement in the Marathon Gardens wildlife habitat and also in the urban garden. So For the wildlife habitat, we usually have a planting once a year, and then maybe a couple of weeding or trash pickup events. And we also have work with Friends of the Rouge on a Rouge, what is it called? Rouge Rescue.
Rouge Rescue, yep.
In May every year. And we do invite people from the community, people from the Frog Partnership, and we usually put an announcement in the Refinery newsletter or send out on some kind of, you know, postcard or something inviting the community to participate in the events. And the timeline is, well, eventually we'd like to have something like an 18-acre wildlife habitat with forest and prairie and wetland habitats. And right now we have approximately 3-acre forest habitat that we're working on and that we've got certified by the Wildlife Habitat Council. So I always tell people that 18 acres is probably more like the 20-year plan, although I certainly would like to get it done sooner than that.
Thanks, Treva. And another question for you from Dale about whether or not Marathon Gardens is accessible to the public. Can anyone just walk onto the Marathon Gardens at any time?
Well, yes, actually right now there's all the public streets. Marathon Gardens is really Oakwood Heights neighborhood, and all the public streets are open. And you have a right to just walk, you know, through those public streets and look at the things you see. We have some signs and some interpretive signage where the wildlife habitat is. And then on the other side of Oakwood Boulevard, on the corner of Gale and Dumfries, we have an urban garden, and you're welcome to, with vegetables and flowers and herbs, and you're welcome to go there anytime and pick what you want, and you know. So yes, it is open to the public.
Thank you so much for that answer, Treva. I appreciate you being on the line with us today. So I think we have quite a few more questions. And so I guess I'll go with a question from Kathy Klein, one of our good friends and partners. Beyond the remaining swamp boats that are still needed to be removed, she's asking kind of how we are able to keep additional abandoned boats from showing up on the island.
Yep, talking about those boats. So yeah, we definitely have to ensure any potential funder that there wouldn't be any new ones coming down. All of those boats, the ones that we removed around Fortson Island and the ones that we showed you that are still there today, they all ended up there around the same time. And we're not really getting any new boats coming in. The only ones that, the only one that I know about was one that when we started kayaking was tied up to the Greenfield Bridge and then let loose, and we've been watching it work its way. It's made it underneath that conveyor belt Orin was talking about. It's headed down towards the Rouge plant. I don't know what happens when it hits the shipping channel, but we're not seeing any new abandonments. Similar to the 65 or so cars we've pulled out of the river. It's more like people are starting to recognize this river as the resource that it is and not a dumping ground. So it's not so much a problem anymore.
Great, thanks so much, Sally, for that for that answer. So there's one more question for Daisy from Rose, and she asked, when did city drinking water come to the island? Did people initially drink out of wells?
No, we never had any city water. There really were no city services at all. The only city services we had was once a year they would come down and they would groom the road because it was a gravel road. But so, you know, you could just use your imagination how you live without city services. And one of them was drinking from a well. And I would like, because I'm elderly and so my mother was 94 when she passed, and we drank that water. We drank it. Basically, we were drinking that yellow stuff that you saw in that picture. And I credit my our longevity, I guess, to my father, how he built that well. And it seems to me that he had to have done something special. I would like to see somebody take a look at that well and see what an old Croatian did. You know, what he brought, what knowledge he brought over from the old country, that we here now today could benefit by.
That was great, Daisy.
Okay.
Thank you so much. So I have another question from Teresa, and she said, I understand the Clean Water Act largely regulated industrial output into the river, and industrial waste has been greatly reduced in the Rouge, but to what degree is it still occurring? Are the petroleum, steel, and asphalt companies mentioned in this presentation still putting some amount of waste into the river?
Because of the Clean Water Act, all industry is now regulated, so they have to have a NPDES, National Pollution Discharge Elimination System Program. So they have to have a permit. So yes, they are still allowed to discharge into the river, but it's very restricted what they can put into the river. One of the big issues with the Rouge is what we call legacy sediments, like we talked about on the very first trip around Zug Island, that a lot of the problems with the sediments came from industry many years ago by industries that maybe are not even here anymore or are owned by somebody else. And like they're doing with cleaning up the contaminated sediments around Zug Island, the next step is going to be to clean up the sediments from Zug Island up to the Ford Rouge plant. And that's going to take a major effort to put together the partners in industry to work with the EPA to do that. And that's something that needs to happen to clean up the Rouge River. And we're hoping that industry and EPA can work together to make that happen.
And sort of as a follow-up, Jolie asked whether or not Friends of the Rouge has met with AK Steel to see if they would be willing to aid in the cleanup of greater efforts, you know, as corporate social responsibility. AK Steel is a sponsor of this presentation, and I believe that it's EPA that does a lot of the outreach to those corporate partners to see if they can be part of the Great Lakes Legacy Act public-private partnership cleanup and sediment remediation project.
Yeah, they supported us. Hopefully they will support that. We were trying to get an interview with AK Steel so we could give you more information about that plant, but I guess their corporate decision makers took a long time, so we couldn't quite do that.
But we do appreciate their support. Thank you. So this is a question, it's kind of jumping back a little bit to I believe the last bascule bridge you talked about, Dr. Gelderloos. Kathy Klein asked, do they use the river water to cool the bridge, or is that treated water?
From what I could tell, there was a hose hanging overside the bridge, and I got the impression it was river water that they were pumping out directly onto the bridge.
Great, yeah, thank you.
Seeing as they don't have plumbing in that tower.
I figured that would be the most resourceful use of their time to do that.
Right.
And I have another question here from Galaxy S9, which I think is probably someone's phone, but and you may have answered this in the first trip, but how strong is the Rouge River current? Do we know how strong it is?
Well, the first time we met, we mentioned that it's 575 gallons per second that come down the river, and the current is it varies from time of the year. If there's more water in it, there's less resistance then and less friction on the sides and the bottom, and so it will flow slightly faster. But it is a very slow moving stream. And even if it gets cleaned up, it's not going to be a babbling brook with clear water. going over the rocks. It's a lot of clay in the water and a lot of silt, and the turbidity is a part of it as well. And so when you get a heavy rain and a storm, then it picks up more things and more turbidity in the water, but it goes much faster. So it's variable, but it is much slower than the Detroit River. That is a very, very strong current,
Okay.
as we saw with the drownings that took place the weekend ago.
Thanks for that, Dr. Gelderloos. I have a question from Ann Ivory. We'll maybe take two more, and we'll wrap up here. But Ann Ivory, the artist that you are, Ann, asked, what color is the slag? And that was probably in reference to some of the asphalt you're talking about, Dr. Gelderloos.
It's basically black, and or gray, and like this, dark colored. But there's another interesting point that if you go on the shores of Lake Michigan, where the iron smelters used to dump their slag into the water, you can find things like Leland blue, and it became glass in those days. And this is a rarity to be collected by the gems collectors. The polished up, it looks like a gem. And Leland blue is kind of an outstanding piece of glass. So, but I've not seen that around here, that people polish it or do anything with it. It's just basically dark from all the piles of slag I've seen.
Maybe she could make some jewelry out of it, or
Maybe.
some doorknobs.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you, Dr. Gelderloos. Very interesting. We'll take one more sort of combined question. This is from Fred, and he's wondering about the statistics that were mentioned earlier, that 80% of the folks in the Oakwood Heights neighborhood took the buyout. Fred was asking kind of, does that include Fortson Island? And also, is that still true now? Are there still 20% of the residents still remaining in the Oakwood Heights neighborhood? That might be for Treva if you're still on.
I do know with Fortson Island that all the homes were torn down in the 80s, so there's no homes there. There is one private property owner, but he doesn't have any buildings there. Treva, are you still on?
Yeah, I'm still on. Yeah, so the buyout happened in about 2012, and since then, Marathon has purchased a few homes, sometimes a few homes a year. Sometimes they don't purchase any. Sometimes they get a few. So it's probably a little bit higher than 80% now, might be 85% or something like that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Treva, and thank you so much, Daisy, for being on to answer questions. I think that'll wrap it up for questions on my end, Sally, so I'll shoot it back to you to wrap us up.
So thanks again for joining us, and Orin and I look forward to seeing you next week as we pick up at the Schaefer Bridge. Orin?
Thank you. Look forward to it.